The team deploys an ROV, a remote-controlled sub attached by cable down to the tiniest detail. The underwater drones then fire signals, measuring variations in height down to the tiniest detail.
What if I told you one of America's most famous World War II warships went down with secrets no one expected for over 80 years? After sinking in 1942, an underwater drone just reached the USS Yorktown. And inside its hangar, where fighter planes should be, the drone found a 1940s Ford civilian car.
It is a 1941 Ford Woody wagon, but this is really neat. And there were a bunch of theories that this was Admiral Fletcher's car.
Sealed inside the wreck. No manifest lists it. No officer claimed it. Historians are speechless, and once you see what else was found inside Yorktown, you'll question everything you know about World War II. The car found in the USS Yorktown when it went down is a 1941 Ford Super Deluxe station wagon.
I'm standing next to this 1941 Ford Super Deluxe Woody.
The kind they called a Woody because of its distinctive wood paneling along the sides. It was a pretty posh vehicle that graced the parking lots of country clubs or beachside resorts before Pearl Harbor changed everything. When the underwater drone that examined Yorktown's wreck first swept its light across it, researchers aboard the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer went silent. They could see the chrome bumper, still gleaming faintly after 8 decades in salt water. The canvas convertible top, somehow intact despite the crushing pressure that would kill any human instantly. The spare tire mounted on the rear, exactly where a driver would expect it. The flared fenders and running boards that marked it unmistakably as a vehicle from another era, from a world that existed before the bombs fell and the carriers burned and young men died in the waters around a tiny atoll called Midway. The Ford sat upright on what had been the hangar deck floor, as if someone had simply driven it in, set the parking brake, and walked away. No debris had crushed it. No collapse had buried it. It waited in the darkness like it was expecting someone to come back and drive it away. But here is the thing. No one knows how the car got on board. No one knows who parked it. And no one can find a single piece of paper that acknowledges it existed. So how did it make it to the ship in the first place? Is the car a bomb in disguise? Or did it have any military significance? This is not how military logistics works. Aircraft carriers are some of the most meticulously documented vessels in naval history. Every piece of equipment, every aircraft, every crate of supplies gets recorded. Weight distribution matters on a ship that needs to launch and recover aircraft. Space allocation matters in a hangar deck where planes have to be moved, maintained, and armed. A vehicle the size of a station wagon.
It is a 1941 Ford Woody wagon, which is a cool car in and of itself.
Does not simply appear without someone writing it down somewhere. But here we are. The surviving crew members who were interviewed in the decades after the war never spoke of a car in the hangar, which leaves historians with a question that has no clean answer. No wonder they are speechless. Different theories have emerged about the car. One theory claims that the Ford was a flag car, a vehicle assigned to a senior admiral for use when going ashore. The Yorktown served as a flagship during parts of its service, hosting command staff who would have needed transportation at various ports. At the time of Midway, Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher flew his flag from the Yorktown, making her the command center for Task Force 17. An admiral of Fletcher's rank would have required a vehicle for official business whenever the fleet made port. Aircraft carriers occasionally carried such vehicles, storing them in the hangar deck when space allowed. The style of the car, an upscale station wagon with wood trim, fits what a flag officer might use for both official duties and the occasional personal errand. But this still doesn't resolve the mystery. Flag cars were typically documented. An admiral's vehicle is not a personal favor someone sneaks aboard. It is official equipment assigned through official channels. The absence of any record is strange. Again, was that car on the USS Yorktown for another reason entirely? Another second theory suggests the car was being transported as cargo, perhaps destined for another base or another command post in the Pacific. Carriers did sometimes serve as impromptu cargo vessels during the war, moving equipment between locations when schedules allowed. The Yorktown had just undergone emergency repairs at Pearl Harbor before sailing to Midway. Loading priorities were chaotic. Perhaps the car came aboard and was simply never offloaded before the battle began. This theory is possible, but it is not military-like. Cars were more commonly shipped on cargo vessels, not on frontline carriers preparing for combat operations. A third possibility is that the vehicle belonged to a specific officer who arranged to bring it aboard through some informal channel. Senior commanders sometimes bent rules during wartime. The car's relatively upscale design fits a personal vehicle rather than standard military equipment. But the Navy was strict about weight and space on carriers, and a purely personal vehicle would have been highly irregular. No letters, no diaries, no post-war memoirs mention any such arrangement. Then there are the more speculative theories. Some researchers have wondered whether the car served some non-obvious purpose: intelligence operations, VIP transport planning, something never fully documented because it was never meant to be public. These theories have no evidence, no precedent, no corroboration. Historians are careful not to drift into myth-making when the facts simply do not support it. What we can rule out is the idea that the car somehow entered the wreck after the sinking. The vehicle sits inside enclosed sections of the hangar deck. The structural collapse patterns around it show it was already in position when the ship went down. No post-war salvage operation could have placed it there. Whatever the explanation, that Ford was aboard the Yorktown on June 7, 1942, when Japanese torpedoes sent the carrier to the bottom of the Pacific. But the car is not the only mystery the drone uncovered. But to understand what else it found and why those discoveries matter, you have to go back to 1937, when the Yorktown was still new, and the war it would die in had not yet begun. The USS Yorktown was commissioned on September 30, 1937. It was the second ship to bear that name in the United States Navy. She was an aircraft carrier of the Yorktown class, one of the most advanced naval vessels of her era, designed to project American power across the vast distances of the Pacific Ocean. At the time of her commissioning, the Pacific was not yet a battlefield. Japan was not yet an enemy in open war. But naval strategists understood that the geography of any future Pacific conflict would require carriers capable of launching aircraft from positions hundreds of miles from their targets. The Yorktown was built for that future. She could carry more than 80 aircraft. She could sustain operations far from any friendly port. She was, by the standards of 1937, a floating airfield designed for a kind of warfare that had never been fought at scale. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Yorktown was in the Atlantic. She was immediately transferred to the Pacific, arriving just in time to become one of the most important ships in the American response. In the months that followed, she participated in raids against Japanese positions in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, struck at targets in New Guinea, and launched the first offensive carrier operations of the Pacific War. By early June 1942, the Yorktown had already survived one major battle.
You know, there was a time many years ago the USS Yorktown was almost scrapped.
At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, Japanese aircraft had hit her with a bomb that killed or wounded more than 60 crew members and caused significant damage. She limped back to Pearl Harbor, where Navy planners estimated she would need months of repairs. She got 3 days. American codebreakers had discovered that Japan was planning a massive assault on Midway Atoll, a tiny island outpost that served as a crucial American foothold in the Central Pacific. Losing Midway would mean losing the ability to project power across thousands of miles of ocean. The Navy needed every carrier it could deploy, and the Yorktown, damaged or not, was ordered to sea. 1,400 workers labored around the clock at Pearl Harbor. They patched her wounds. They welded her broken hull. They did not complete the repairs so much as they made her seaworthy enough to fight. On May 30th, just 72 hours after arriving, the Yorktown sailed for Midway. What happened over the next week would become one of the most studied naval engagements in history. The Battle of Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War, the moment when Japan's advance finally broke against American resistance. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk in a single day, a catastrophic loss that Japan would never recover from. The Imperial Navy had dominated the Pacific for 6 months. After Midway, it would never dominate again. The Yorktown was hit again during the battle, this time by dive bombers that scored direct hits on her flight deck. Fires raged through her compartments. Flooding tilted her to one side. Her crew fought to save her, and for a time, it seemed they might succeed.
Former USS Yorktown crew members are sharing their stories from when they lived aboard the ship.
Damage control parties contained the fires. The list was corrected. The Yorktown remained afloat, wounded but alive. Then the torpedo planes came. Japanese aircraft found the crippled carrier and put 2 more torpedoes into her hull. She survived even that, still floating, still fighting to stay above water. The Navy took her under tow, hoping to drag her back to Pearl Harbor for repairs. For hours, it seemed possible that the Yorktown might live to fight again. Then, on the morning of June 6th, a Japanese submarine found her and fired a spread of torpedoes. 2 struck the carrier. 1 hit the destroyer USS Hammond, which was alongside providing power and pumps. The Hammond broke in half and sank in minutes. The Yorktown held on for another day, her crew finally evacuated, her hull slowly filling with water. On June 7th, 1942, she rolled over and slipped beneath the Pacific. For decades afterward, the wreck lay undiscovered. 3 miles of water is deep enough to hide almost anything. The Pacific is vast enough to lose a ship entirely. But in 1998, Robert Ballard, the explorer who had found the Titanic, located the Yorktown northwest of Hawaii. His cameras captured images of a remarkably intact vessel, standing upright on the seafloor as if she had simply settled down to rest. That discovery confirmed where the Yorktown lay. What it could not do was reveal what she still held inside. Her hangar deck was too deep, too dark, too dangerous for the technology of that era. The secrets she carried remained locked within her hull for another 27 years, until April 2025, when a drone named Deep Discoverer finally went inside and discovered the mysterious Ford car. The Ford was not the only thing waiting in the darkness of the Yorktown's hangar deck. The ROV's cameras found something else, something that in its own way left historians even more astonished. Aircraft, but not just any aircraft, the Douglas SBD Dauntless. At least 3 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers were still inside the hangar, preserved in the cold and the dark since 1942. These were not just any planes. These were aircraft that had participated in the Battle of Midway itself. One of them was still armed. A bomb remained attached beneath the fuselage, ready to be dropped on a Japanese target that no longer existed, waiting for a mission that would never be flown. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what the Dauntless was and what it did at Midway. The SBD Dauntless was the standard American carrier-based dive bomber of the early war years.
The SBD Dauntless that you see behind me. We're fortunate to have with us our resident expert on that battle and our historian.
It was a two-seat aircraft, relatively slow, not particularly maneuverable, but capable of delivering bombs with devastating accuracy. At Midway, Dauntless pilots did something that changed the course of the war in a matter of minutes. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, American dive bombers caught the Japanese carrier force at exactly the wrong moment. The Japanese flight decks were crowded with aircraft being rearmed and refueled. Bombs and torpedoes lay exposed. Fuel lines were open. When the Dauntless pilots pushed over into their dives, they turned that chaos into catastrophe. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers at Midway were burning wreckage. The 4th followed hours later. The Yorktown's air group participated in those attacks. Her Dauntless pilots pushed over into their dives alongside pilots from Enterprise and Hornet. They dove through anti-aircraft fire. They released their bombs at altitudes so low they could see the faces of Japanese sailors looking up at them. Some of her planes were damaged in combat and landed on other carriers when the Yorktown herself was under attack. Some never came back at all, and some, apparently, returned to her hangar deck in the hours between her bomb damage and her final sinking, where they have remained ever since. The aircraft found by the 2025 expedition appear to include planes from both the Yorktown and the USS Enterprise, another carrier in the American task force. At least one carries markings suggesting it flew from Enterprise during the attack on the Japanese carrier Kaga, then landed on Yorktown when it could not reach its own ship. This kind of cross-deck operation was common during carrier battles, when damaged planes landed wherever they could find a deck that was not on fire. What makes the discovery unprecedented is that these are the first aircraft from the Battle of Midway ever documented in their battlefield context. Historians have studied Midway from every angle for 8 decades. They have analyzed flight logs and after-action reports and interviews with survivors. They have reconstructed the movements of every squadron and debated the decisions of every commander. Museums display dauntless aircraft that survived the war. Memorials honor the pilots who did not. But until now, no one had ever seen the actual planes from the battle itself, still sitting where they were left when the ship began to sink, still armed, still waiting for missions that would never come. The bomb beneath that dauntless fuselage is not a museum piece. It is physical evidence from one of the most important battles of the 20th century, frozen in time at the moment the Yorktown began her final descent. Consider what that means. Every dauntless aircraft in every museum today survived because it was not lost in combat. Those planes flew training missions, or sat in reserve, or were retired after the war ended. They are artifacts of survival. The planes inside the Yorktown are something else entirely. They are artifacts of the battle itself, preserved in the exact configuration they held when everything went wrong. The fuel in their tanks, the ammunition in their guns, the bomb that was never dropped. These are not replicas or reconstructions. They are the real thing, untouched since June 1942. For historians who have spent decades reconstructing what happened at Midway through documents and photographs and survivor accounts, this is like opening a time capsule they never expected to find. The markings on the aircraft can tell them which squadrons flew which missions. The damage patterns can reveal what kind of fire these planes took. The positioning in the hangar can suggest what the crew was trying to do in those final hours before the ship went down. And it raises a question that the car also raised, though in a different way. How much do we not know about what was happening aboard this ship in her final hours? If a full-size automobile and multiple armed aircraft could remain unmentioned in the historical record, what else might be waiting in that darkness? Deep inside the Yorktown, far from the hangar deck where the car and the aircraft waited, the ROV discovered something that was neither a mystery nor a weapon. It was art. A massive hand-painted mural covered one of the ship's interior walls. 42 feet long and 12 feet high, it depicted a world map with markings showing everywhere the Yorktown had sailed. The title read, "A Chart of the Cruises of the USS Yorktown." This was not official Navy decoration. It was the work of the crew themselves, created in the long stretches of peacetime sailing when there was time for projects that had nothing to do with combat. Sailors had painted it during the ship's early years, tracking their voyages across the Atlantic and Pacific, recording the places they had been before the war turned their floating home into a frontline weapon. Someone had carefully drawn the coastlines. Someone had lettered the place names. Someone had taken pride in showing exactly where the Yorktown had traveled, as if documenting her journeys mattered, as if anyone would care to know. They could not have known that their ship would become famous. They could not have imagined that their battles would be studied for generations, that historians would reconstruct every hour of their final days, that their captain's decisions would be debated in books they would never read. They certainly could not have predicted that their artwork would survive 83 years beneath the Pacific Ocean, outlasting not just the ship, but everyone who served aboard her. Earlier expeditions had glimpsed fragments of the mural. Cameras in 1998 caught partial images, enough to know it existed, not enough to see it clearly. The colors were muted by depth and time. The details were lost in the darkness. The 2025 dive changed that. High-resolution imagery captured the full 42 feet for the first time, revealing the specific routes the ship had traveled, the ports she had visited, the careful hand of whoever held the paintbrush in 1938 or 1939 or 1940. The mural survived because of where it was located, protected from the worst of the damage that sank the ship, shielded from currents and sediment by the structure around it. The painted surface remained largely intact. In a wreck where you would expect 83 years of ocean exposure to have destroyed everything fragile, this piece of the Yorktown's human story endured. The expedition also documented other aspects of the wreck, the damage patterns that reveal exactly how the ship sank, the structural details that confirm the violence of her final hours, the marine life that has colonized her hull over 8 decades, including what may be a previously unknown species of jellyfish drifting through compartments where sailors once worked. These finds are protected by the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. No artifacts were removed. The Yorktown remains where she fell, a war grave and a time capsule, now better documented than ever before. But the mural, more than any technical finding, captures something about what was lost when the Yorktown went down. A ship is not just steel and machinery. It is the people who lived aboard, the community they built, the small gestures of creativity and belonging that turned a warship into a home. Somewhere in the Pacific, 3 miles down, a hand-painted map still marks the journeys of men who died defending it. The sailors who painted that mural did not know they were creating a memorial. They were just passing time, recording their travels, making something that felt like it mattered during the long days at sea. They painted coastlines they had seen, and ports they had visited, and routes they had sailed before anyone knew there would be a war. And then the war came, and the ship that carried their artwork became a weapon, and the weapon was destroyed, and for 83 years, that painted map sat in darkness at the bottom of the Pacific, while the world above forgot it existed. Now we have seen it again. Now we know it survived. 3 miles beneath the Pacific, the Yorktown keeps her secrets. A car that no one can explain. Aircraft still armed for a battle that ended 8 decades ago. A hand-painted mural that outlasted every sailor who created it. These are not mysteries in the traditional sense. No one hid them. No one covered them up. They were simply lost in the chaos of war and the vastness of the ocean, waiting for technology to advance far enough to find them again. The 2025 expedition did not solve every question. It may have created new ones, but it proved something that matters. Even the most studied events in history still contain surprises. Even the wrecks we thought we understood can reveal things we never expected. Who knows what more secrets the Yorktown is still hiding? Who knows the secrets that have become forever lost at sea?